Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Byte-Sized HR, powered by LutherOne. I'm your host, Loic, and today we have a very special guest, Enrique Rubio, the founder of Global HR Communities. Enrique is a renowned HR influencer and tech visionary with over 20 years of experience in HR and technology. In this episode, with co-host Lukas Foglar, co-founder of LutherOne, we will dive into the rise of HR communities, podcasts, and consultancies, exploring the driving forces behind this trend and the impact they aim to make in the HR world. We'll also discuss how platforms like Byte-Sized HR and Enrique's upcoming podcast, which you'll hear a bit more during this episode, contribute to this evolving landscape. Let's get started. Enrique, thank you very much for joining us on this video podcast. Lukas Foglar as well, thank you very much for joining us. Let's get straight into it. I mean, we have quite a few questions we need to cover with this funnel approach. Of course, one of the first one being having a better understanding into an introduction towards the HR communities and the trends. With the first question being, hacking HR has become a pivotal community in the HR world. Can you tell us about its mission and the inspiration behind its creation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation. And yes, I am the founder of Hacking HR, and now I have an advisor role, given that I'm also building a global community for an awesome brand called Transform. So, I am a community builder. I think that's in my DNA. I didn't know that years back, but now I do. But with Hacking HR, when I created it in 2017, the purpose of the community was to bridge the gap between technology and HR. And in
Love it.
fact, I was one of the very few people back in the early 2010s, 15 to 16, that was talking about the impact of AI in HR. And you can imagine back then we didn't have all this. Open AI or generative AI. We didn't have ChatGPT or any of these tools that are coming up right now. And people were like, well, we don't know. That may not happen anytime soon. Maybe it's too far into the future. And I'm like, well, it's going to happen, right? And it's better just for us to get ready. But I realized that beyond AI, there was still a gap between technologists and HR people. And that gap needed to be closed. And originally, I created Hacking HR to close that gap, to have conversations that were mostly around technology and HR. And as I traversed this journey, doing the events and the community gatherings that we were doing, I realized that there were many more gaps that needed to be closed for HR to become what I think it can become, which is what I call a trailblazer. I think HR can be the trailblazer that leads people, organizations, and other leaders forward into the future of work. But we have the potential to do that. Having the potential to do something doesn't mean that you can do it today. You just have to realize that potential. And all I wanted to do was, okay, let me help out HR realize that potential and truly become that trailblazer. So that's the origin story of Hacking HR. I wanted to do something to close those gaps. And I wanted to make sure that I was doing my part in creating a better HR, which impacts pretty much everybody in every organization in the world. So that's the origin story.
And do you feel actually, because apologies, Lucas, but I feel that there's already something to be said as well on that first point, but do you feel you've accomplished that mission that you've taken on when building Hacking HR? I mean, of course, we can look at the numbers, we can see what Hacking HR has provided as well as a community, but how do you feel about it in regards to that?
No, I haven't accomplished the mission. And the reality is that if you ask me this question in 25 years from now, the answer will be the same. No, I have not accomplished this mission because the world is changing. And as the world is changing, new gaps open up everywhere, right? Imagine if you and I had this conversation in January of 2019, of 2019, I would have said, well, we are closing some gaps. But if we had had the same conversation 3 months later, I would have said a bunch of new gaps open up because of COVID. Now we quickly have to scramble and think, how are we going to make sure that our people are safe, that their well-being, physical, mental, emotional well-being is safeguarded, but at the same time that the organizations that these people are working for continue to operate and be successful and grow and thrive in this very complex environment. So those gaps would have opened up completely anew at that very moment. So today it
Yeah.
is ChatGPT, right? And in the US, we have elections this year, another gap opening up about having conversations on civility in the workplace, and whatever happens in November here in the US, it's going to impact people. Like,
Definitely.
this country is very divided, right? And it's going to impact people, some of them positively and some of them negatively. So there's a new gap that we have to talk about, which is how we close the polarization gap and how we have conversations with civility. Next year, there's going to be something else. I don't know what's going to happen next year. So there's always going to be a new gap that will open up, and we will need to close that gap a little bit more. So this is an ongoing journey. It's an evolving journey. Problems are getting more complex. People have different expectations. New generations are operating differently. There's climate change, and there's demographic shift, and there's diasporas around the world. So all of these things are creating new gaps, and we need to resolve those new gaps, hopefully in advance, but some of them just happen when they happen. So once again, the answer to the question about whether I have accomplished the mission of helping HR become a trailblazer, the answer is no. But what I think I have accomplished is inspire a generation of HR people that now I believe truly believe in themselves. I didn't see this. I'm not going to say that I achieved this on my own, but there are a lot of communities right now that didn't exist when I created Hacking HR. These are a lot of new communities, a lot of new leaders, and maybe I had a little bit to do with that, because they come to me and they say, "Hey, you inspired me to do this." And if I was able to inspire only one person to create another community in whatever in the world to do something positive for HR, I just feel good about myself. So, the work is an ongoing work, but I feel that we have progressed significantly over the past 7 years, among other things, because of the work that Hacking HR, Transform, and many other groups out there are doing. And I am hoping that I have been one of the trailblazers, helping people sort of traverse the journey into the future of work.
I love it. Thank you for the clarity.
To another question of mine. There are more people joining your mission, and you said it yourself. And at least in recent years, we've seen a significant increase in the creation of professional communities, blogs, podcasts, all focused on HR. What do you think is driving this surge? Is it Enrique inspiring? Are there more gaps? Or why now? Why are so many people focused on this mission now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I will say that and I am hoping that this is the answer to most of those communities, right? There's the people is the edge, the competitive edge for companies right now. The people function, a people first culture. And we knew this years ago, by the way. This is not a new thing. We didn't discover this yesterday. We knew that organizations that had great employee experience, that treated people with dignity, with respect, where people feel that they belong to those organizations, where there was a positive relationship between direct reports and their manager, where the organization was sharing the success, especially the financial success of that organization with the people. We knew, and generally this was gut feeling, by the way. Now we have the data, but before we knew that those organizations were much better positioned to be more competitive, the returns were higher, the financial returns were higher in those organizations than those that were not thinking of their people as the real main and most valuable asset, right? I mean, there's a difference between saying our people are the most valuable asset and really operating as if your people are the most valuable asset. So for a lot of us that understand that the people function, people are the competitive edge of an organization, we realize if that is true, then there's a bunch of gaps that we need to close in order to bring that the truth of that story into reality, right? For example, if we know that people who feel that they belong to their organizations, people who feel that they can build meaningful connections and relationships at work, are more engaged than those who are not, than those who don't have those kinds of feelings in their organizations. And we have the data now to prove that, by the way. But if we know that that is true, then there's one gap that we need to close, for example, and it's the gap of the relationship between the manager, a direct manager, and their team, and their teams and their people. So that's a gap that we need to close. So as HR professional, I have to say, how can I better coach and serve my managers in this organization so that they build the conditions for people to feel that they belong, that they can build meaningful connections at work, and they are more engaged, therefore more productive, and work with more effectiveness and more efficiency in their teams and their workplace. So if that is true, that's been true for me, by the way. And if that's true for a lot of these community builders, that they see that this is the edge, what they are finding is, well, I need to do something about this. I need to help close some of those gaps, right? So let me create a community that is a community focused on HR people helping managers. So we create a community on HR people helping managers. And somebody else says like, wait a second, but a lot of people are burnt out, and burnout is not good for business. So let me create a community of the HR community of people that are against burnout. So there's another community. I'm not saying that there's a community like that, right? But I'm sure there is somewhere a community of, the HR burnouts, right? And we don't want to the HR people against burnout. So we are the community of HR people against burnout, because we know that burned out HR people will not be able to do their work as they have to, and employees neither, right, will be able to do that. So we recognized that there's value in truly operationalizing this idea of people are the most valuable asset at work.
Yeah.
And for the community builders themselves, when they see that, they realize, oh, that's important, but there's nobody answering to the questions on how to do that. So I'm going to create something to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very, very positive thing. And one last thing that I want to say is this. Because nobody believed in HR before, and I'm not saying nobody, maybe except the HR people themselves, but HR has been considered for a long time like a necessary evil in the workplace. And that's not what it is, by the way, but that's the way it's been considered, right? And because people didn't really see the value necessarily of the HR function as valuable as it is, but they didn't see the value in it, not too many people before were willing to create these communities. We're willing to create spaces for HR to advance and to progress. And because that happened, there was a monopoly of the community of HR, and maybe a couple of other communities around the world. They had this monopoly, and not because they wanted to build it that way. It's just because nobody else was building communities in HR. And these groups are so obsolete, so backward looking. They are really monolithic. They are not responding to the needs of HR. And now that we're saying HR is just so critical for any organization, people are saying, let me create something that responds to that, that addresses that. And I think that's what's happening. It's very inspiring that there are people that are driven by this idea that HR is incredibly important, that our role is building is as a trailblazer, as I mentioned before, and that most existing groups are not responding to that, and we need to do something about it. So congratulations to everybody who has had that thought and decided, I want to do something about it. And they are building their own communities. By the way, my answers to all your questions are so long. Maybe the next one I want to try to do it short. I told you at the beginning, I talk a lot and I talk fast.
No worries there. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said. And I love the fact that you were mentioning about the concept of how HR was looked before and now. And, on top of that, there's no denying the fact that people are willing to speak out today in regards to the problems they might be facing and how to deal with it and trying to support each other. And I love that. Yes, I'm defining in a way a community, but I feel that you were already starting to answer one of our questions that we have when it comes to the role these communities have. Because if we look at the numbers, we have 2 million podcasts available with 48 million episodes. Of course, not all of them are for professional development and industry insight, but quite a significant portion are part of that. And I would like to know from your perspective, what role do you believe these platforms play in the continuous learning and networking of HR professional?
Yeah, I'll get back to that, but I said before that I was going to make this answer shorter, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be longer. So I'm gonna get to that answer in a second. But before that, I want to say something that I think is valuable for in light of a comment that you just made, right? And I made too, which is, in the past, maybe people didn't give that much value to HR. And when you look at several functional areas within organizations, all of them have gone through significant evolutions. IT technology went through a significant evolution in the 80s and the 90s, especially because of the advent of the internet. Marketing went through a significant evolution in the 2000s because of first of all, because of the massification of the internet, but because of the rise of social media. So they went through their own evolution. Then there was finance with the financial crashes that happened in the 2008 and 9, right? We had that created the conditions for finance to evolve from what they were doing before. And this now is the time of HR, right? Since the mid 2010s, 2015s and whatnot, there's been an increased focus on HR, not just from HR people, by the way, but from business leaders who think there's an opportunity here to do better HR, because if we do that, our organizations are going to be so much better. And of course, in the case of HR, as opposed, I think, to IT or finance or marketing, the evolution of HR has been like a roller coaster, right? One day we're like, oh, HR is super important, let's invest in HR. And then the following day, oh, let's cut the budget of HR, no DEI anymore, not well-being anymore, whatever, right? So it's been very like roller coaster-like. But the point is that in the past, at least 10 years, there has been an increased focus on HR and the evolution of HR as the epicenter of business transformation, which already happened to other functions. So I think that's very, very positive. Unfortunately, it's been that roller coaster kind of journey and not like an exponential journey, which is the way I would have loved it to be like. But I take it, right? Even if it's a roller coaster, I still take it versus business leaders not paying attention to HR. And in that journey of evolution, by the way, and now I'm going to respond to your question, learning and development, which when you ask them, sometimes they say, well, we're not HR. To me, that falls in HR. To me, that all falls in the people function, learning and development, recruitment, compensation, all of that falls in the people function. So learning and development it's undergoing right now significant transformations as well, because of the rise of social media, the massification of the internet, the rise of the smartphone, and now AI, all the things that are happening in the generative AI space. So especially like podcasts, for example, which were invented pretty much by Apple, right?
Yep.
The fact that now we can consume knowledge and content in this way is incredibly powerful, because in the past, it was very traditional. It was very cookie cutter, right? We thought everybody learns in the same way. Coming to a seminar, coming to a workshop where you pay a bunch of people thousands of dollars and you sit there through 3 or 4 days of listening to somebody and looking at slides on a screen. But we knew this before. Now we are just taking advantage of it, that people learn in different ways. Some people just learn by listening to interviews, and some people learn by listening to interviews and then doing, and some other people learn by looking at something, and some other people learn by touching something, right? So I think the rise of podcasts, but also webcasts and webinars and all of these things, thanks to technology, I think that is incredibly valuable, because people learn in different ways, and there's a massive amount of people who like learning by listening to podcast interviews. So you have to cater to them. You cannot force them to come to a seminar where they are like, oh my gosh, their minds is somewhere else. They would prefer to be listening to a podcast at that very moment. So I think it's incredibly valuable that we have all of these tools available and different ways for people to say, I choose to listen to a podcast rather than reading a book, for example, right? I mean, there are people who choose that. Whatever. I mean, if that works for them, I mean, as long as they're learning something, that's what matters, I think.
Valid points.
I think that we can all agree that communities can play a very crucial role in like various professional fields. However, let me play devil's advocate for a moment, because some people might perceive communities as fluffy or maybe lacking substantial impact. Can you share any specific examples of how community platforms have actually facilitated meaningful change or any type of innovation in the HR space?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'm going to add something to that question, which is Some communities call themselves communities, and they are not communities. They are just marketing tools for companies to sell something. And that sucks. That really sucks because they screw it up for the rest of us who are actually building a community. And it kind of bothers me, right? What I have something against is when you say that you're something that you really are not. So when I said before that there's a cohort, a cadre of people that really believe in HR and are building communities, I think they are phenomenal and they should keep doing the work that they are doing. But for the practitioners that are joining these communities, you just have to keep your eyes wide open and understand that this is not the same drive for all of us building communities. Some people are truly into this because there's a money ambition or a financial ambition behind it, which again, I am not judging. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I'm just saying if that is what you are up to, you just have to tell people that that's what you are up to, rather than sharing a message that is not really what you are building. So that makes me go back to your question, which is, do communities really make change? Yes, they do. And they do for several reasons. Number one, when one of the top drivers for happiness, and I know this is kind of a weird thing to mention in the context of this conversation, right? But one of the top drivers for happiness is building meaningful relationships with others. That's always in the top 3 of the top drivers for happiness. And given the complexity of the problems that we're dealing with, and the fact that most of us are burned out, and there's so much going on at work, when you have the capacity to build a connection with somebody else who understands what you're going through in your workplace, whether they are in your organization or not, just having that somebody who listens to you, who you can talk to, who you can vent to, and vice versa, that in itself creates a massive outlet for you to say, there is somebody out there who gets it. There is somebody out there who gets me and gets what I'm going through and is providing some, great insights and ideas, or just sitting there listening to me, bitching about the world, right? So whatever it is, doesn't matter. There is somebody in there, and you find that. Hopefully you find that in your workplace, but sometimes you don't. And if you don't, when you join a community of practice, when you join a community of peers, and you find that you already have a powerful at least well-being, wellness, and maybe even an emotional outlet that helps you at least vent all of that you may be going through. So there's a well-being component in there, right? And that already is very impactful. The other component, which may be more technical, so to speak, is connecting with what I said before. The nature of the problems that we're dealing with today is just so complex, and it seems to be getting more and more complex, right? But the point here is that the nature of the problems that we're dealing with is complex, is difficult. We can't solve those problems alone. When you go to a community and you have a meeting, imagine people working on complex technological problems to solve climate change, for example. I'm not talking about HR here, climate change. And you go to a meeting with people that are in various countries working in different fields within the space of climate change, and you just talk to those people and you say, wow, I didn't know that idea before. And then you say, well, I have this extra idea. So those two ideas make the whole better, and then you walk away with something that you may not have known before having had that meeting in that community. This is true for HR. You may be saying, or you may be dealing with, an employee engagement problem. You come to a meeting and then you find other people in that meeting, in that community, who tell you, yeah, we were having that problem a couple of years back. This is what we did. I don't know if that's going to help you or not. I don't know if that's going to work for you or not, but that's what we did. That alone gives you an idea that you may not have had before you came into that community. That in itself is impactful. So there's an emotional well-being component, and there is a technical / work-related component, all of which you can draw out of being part of a community. So they do have an impact, a positive impact in you personally and in the work you do.
Like, if I put the emotional support bit aside for a moment, I really like what you mentioned at the third point. My question is, like, how do you then balance the benefits of community, the overall engagement with the community, but also the need to protect your intellectual property? Because ultimately you cannot share everything. Like, how do you get that insight and that help that you need to solve the problem without putting your business at risk?
Yeah.
That's a good
Well,
one.
that's a phenomenal question. I mean, you come into a community expecting, of course, that there is a level of respect and a level of privacy and confidentiality
Mm,
that is the ground rule of being part of that community, right? And sometimes you come to meetings that are we don't do that ourselves in the communities that I take part of, but there are communities where the community is actually very small groups, maybe 5, 10 people.
mm,
It's like AA, right? You come to a meeting and your basic ground rule is this is a private space. You're talking to people that may
mm.
be dealing with the same issues that you're dealing, but none of them is going to go out to say, "Hey, Enrique is dealing with this problem," right? That's ground rule. And it's the same thing in here. You come to a meeting where there are 5 people around you, and you're going to talk about mental health, and you may be sharing some information. I mean, I'm talking about the emotional part of it, right? But you may be sharing some information that you don't want anybody else to know about. Same thing with you don't have to release the formula for Coca-Cola if you go to a meeting. I mean, don't do that, of course. I mean, even if it says in the contract to be part of that community that you are in a safe space where everything is confidential, I would not reveal the formula for Coca-Cola, but I would come in and say, you know what? In general terms, we're having an issue that we need people in, I don't know, we need to hire people in the Southeast Asia region, and we are not finding the talent that we need. Is anybody else here dealing with that problem? I'm sorry. And how are you resolving it? So you can still
Mm,
bring in your problems and your ideas, but again, you have to be mindful that we're still
mm,
humans, and you can trust, but you cannot blindly trust, right? So I wouldn't come to a community saying all these people are going to steal my ideas and I'm not going to work with them, because otherwise don't join a community if that's your like your starting point, right? You come to a community saying we are professionals here, we should be respecting each other, we should be trusting that that we have each other's back here, and that's my foundation. My baseline is that, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to
mm.
reveal everything.
Yeah, yeah.
A community is never that, by the way. Even the idea of belonging, when we define belonging, and I know we're just bringing that up in the context of this question right now, but when we define belonging, generally it's like, feeling that you can be who you are at work. But being who you are at work doesn't mean not having filters. you know
Mhm.
I mean, it doesn't mean like, oh, like I have a potty mouth, by the way. I say a lot about words, and I think I only said one in this podcast so far. In my day-to-day conversations, I say a lot about words, but I am generally mindful. When I go to a meeting, I say, hey, this is the way I am, and I am filtering myself. Can I say bad words in here? Some people say, no, I'm sorry, but you can't, because this context, and I refrain myself from saying those bad words. Right? That doesn't mean that I cannot be who I am. They are just saying, we have some criteria here. It's the same thing with communities, right? I mean, you go to a community and you want to feel that you belong, but it doesn't mean that you don't have any filters. Again, you are
Mm.
not going to reveal the formula of or your most valuable and precious innovations in your workplace. That's You wouldn't do that probably even with anybody. You may have an NDA signed, with your company. So anyway, all that to say that you trust, but you don't blindly trust.
Fair
That's a
enough.
good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And actually, Bob, you've already answered most of the question we had in regards to impact and value of the community. So let's get straight into something that's kind of more and more emerging these days, and specifically the emergence of new HR consultants and
Yeah.
the influences that follow from that. There's no hiding the fact that HR consultant influencer is evident. It's rising since post-pandemic. But what do you consider, what other factors do you think contribute to more professional taking on these roles in the first place?
Yeah. By the way, can I say bad words in here? Do you guys allow that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Depends on
the
how
co- the
bad.
Be transparent.
the concept of influencers is like pure bullshit. I'm gonna begin there.
Okay.
Pure
Yeah.
bullshit. Because what an influencer, I love the concept of influencing, but when I go to Instagram, for example, and I see somebody, I don't know, maybe somebody who calls themselves an influencer, and I think, yeah, but what are you influencing? I mean, you're just posting, ridiculous pictures that I don't know what kind of influence you're talking about. To me, an influence is helping somebody, enabling somebody for change, enabling somebody to fall in love with an idea, and inspire them to follow that idea. That to me is more akin to the concept of influence that I believe in. And when so to me there's a distinction between having somebody with knowledge that is positively influencing the world by sharing an idea and having people kind of like rally around that idea, hopefully a positive one, because there are negative influencers out there or negative change makers as well. So you have people rallying around that idea. That is the kind of influence that I want to see in the world, not just people who don't know about what they're talking about, but they just say it in the way that people like to see it in social media. And then they get a bunch of likes and then they get a bunch of comments. And I see a lot of them. Like, I go to LinkedIn and now I see the top LinkedIn influencers. Somebody who has spent like 2 years in HR and they were an intern like 3 years ago. I'm not saying anything wrong about this. I'm not judging that. But you really cannot be so much of an influencer if your own experience has been that, right? It's just so short. And again, I'm not saying that you cannot be an influencer. It's just that to me, if I am an HR, I've been working for 25 years now, right? So, and I don't even call myself an influencer, So I don't know. There's like something that I think we're missing, which is, does this person have the experience and the expertise, the knowledge, the stories that are not generated by AI and shared in the proper way to be algorithm liked on LinkedIn? Is this person the proper person that you would want to follow because that person has cultivated the stories, the experience, the ideas after years of working on that, right? I don't know. There's a difference in there. So all I'm saying here is make sure that if you work in HR, just make sure that you are scrutinizing the people that you are following, right? The people whose ideas you are embracing, because there's a difference between being an influencer, as in somebody who knows how to take a picture of themselves and post it on social media and get a bunch of likes, and somebody who has cultivated years of knowledge and can tell you, I don't think we should go that way because I already tried that in various industries for so long and that didn't work. That doesn't mean that it's not going to work for anybody, but it just didn't work for me for these reasons. I don't think that if you've been working in HR for a couple of years, you may have some of that experience, but I don't know if I would consider you necessarily an influence. I would still value your insights and your ideas and the stories that you're sharing. But from that to calling you an influencer, I'm not sure, So anyway, it just bothers me because, we are, Carl Sagan called this the dumbing down of American society. He had this famous quote about how education is losing value and when we're dumbing ourselves down. And I see it every day. I see people that, they just know how to share something to be liked by the algorithms, therefore to be liked by people because they put that idea in front of everybody, even if it's a stupid idea or an idea that has not been tested. And the real people that have the experience, the knowledge, the stories, the expertise, they may not be the best, social media experts, right? And they are like over there with just like 10 followers, and I'm like, but those are the ones that we should be listening to, So anyway,
I think that's a great advice for life. Just check the credentials.
Check the credentials, because I think that that's valuable, right? Especially now that there's no filter on social media. Everybody can call themselves an influencer or something like that. So because there's no filter in social media, you now have to become the filter. You yourself, you got to go into that person's profile and you got to check it out and say, yeah, well, this person has something to say, right? And that's it, right? So I think that to me is what matters here.
I'll throw another curveball in the conversation. I'm going a little bit on a tangent here, but people with lots of expertise and people who have been in the field for years have acquired certain knowledge, know-how, experience, and to a certain degree, that might have been skewed by how things were always done, and then you sometimes need a fresh perspective, somebody who thinks differently, and that actually might be a person who is not necessarily from the field. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that is an absolute necessity anywhere that you go to. If you look at my history talking about HR, you will find that whenever somebody asks me, what do you think HR people need to stay relevant? My answer has always been the same. You have to think outside of HR. You have to get outside of the cocoon of HR and think like an engineer, or I'm an engineer, by the way. I am an electronic engineer who I ended up working in HR. And I think like an engineer in the work that I do in HR. Um, you think like an engineer, you think like a marketer, you think like an IT person, you think like a finance person. Doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in any of those fields, but just thinking like that, just reading, every month, just get the one magazine of, the CFOs of the world and see what they're talking about. That's going to give you great insights to do your own work better. I don't think I would have been able to build a successful community. I don't think I would be able to do all the things that I'm doing right now if I wasn't an engineer. I don't think so. If I had spent most of my life in HR, maybe I would be in a completely different place. Maybe it's still a phenomenal place in my career, but I don't think it would be exactly this place in which I am now. I think what I am right now is the result of the cross-pollination of different fields. I am an engineer. I worked as an entrepreneur as a business entrepreneur, but also in nonprofits for a while. I used to be in my birth country, Venezuela. I used to be involved in a little bit of politics before, like for a couple of years, until I found out that people are very nasty to each other. And I'm like, nope, I don't want anything to do with this. But even those 2 years of experience have built the person that I am right now, have created the person that I am right now. Only because I decided I don't want to be just an engineer forever, and I don't want to be just in HR forever. I want to make sure that I am looking around to see what's happening in the world. That doesn't mean that I have to be the expert in politics or the expert in nonprofits or the expert in entrepreneurship. It just means that I know a little bit, so much or enough to say there is something there that I can connect with something here, and this connection will be so much better. And I would not be able to make this connection if I was just here or just there, right? Yeah. So your question is very powerful, because talking about that scrutiny that I talked about before, when you scrutinize somebody, you also look at what they've done. I love when I see the profile of somebody who is in HR, but it's an HR leader who was in marketing before, who was in operations before, and maybe in finance before. And I'm like, this is a very well-rounded person. Or somebody who is in HR, and then I see them moving to a CEO role. And I have a lot of friends who have done that, by the way, in very successful companies. I just can't, what I imagine is, just think about the value for this business of having a CEO who was a CHRO before, somebody who was selected to be CEO, was appointed to be CEO because of the business savviness of that person. I don't know if savviness is a word, savvy or savviness of that person, but somebody who is coming to that role thinking people are important, people matter. That's beautiful. That is beautiful to me. So the cross-pollination of fields, of ideas, of expertise, across various functional areas, to me is valuable. To me, it's much better to grow transversally, like an exponential curve, like not just vertically. It's not just getting better at being the best recruiter in the world, for example, or being the best consultant in the world. It is getting better in being a consultant, but also getting a little bit better in marketing, a little bit better in sales, a little bit better in engineering, a little bit better in AI. All of that combination compounds to something a lot more powerful than just growing in your own vertical. That, to me, that's what I do in my life every day. Literally, I read, like you look at my bookshelf here. I have books about evolution. I just read one about volcanoes because I went to Yellowstone and I wanted to know what the hell was going on with the volcanoes in Yellowstone. I'm finalizing now one book about how the moon was formed. And you're like, what the hell do you have to do with the moon? Nice. I just saw the book in there and I'm like, whoa, this is so interesting. Now, am I going to find a connecting dot between how the moon was formed and how to create HR communities? I don't know. I may not, right? But whatever I'm reading in there, it's just making me a tiny bit better than if I hadn't read that book.
All right. You've got an impressive story. And we also happen to know that you're working on an HR podcast yourself that is set to launch soon. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek as to what listeners can expect from your podcast? Will it be more of Enrique's story, or is it anything else?
Is there going to be any side of the moon included?
Well, if we can find the connections, right? I mean, I'm still in the quest of finding connections between things that I know they have a connection with the work that I do. But the podcast is going to be called Humans of Work. And I'm interviewing people that are talking about things that are still outside of HR or outside the traditional realm of HR. I talked to somebody about love, and I interviewed this person about love. I talked to somebody about the science of well-being. I talked to somebody about negotiation. Those interviews are already recorded, and in all of these conversations, once again, I am not necessarily making the connection myself in the actual podcast, but if you listen to them, it's like reading the Book of the Moon. Maybe there's nothing, but you learned a data point that you didn't know before, or maybe there is something you say, whoa, that's an interesting idea. I'm going to bring that idea to the work that I do, whether you're in HR or not, by the way, but I'm going to bring that idea to the work that I do because there's something in that connection that is better than if I didn't consider that connection as something valuable. So anyway, the podcast is about those kinds of conversations that are right outside of HR, but not too far out of HR. So I'm not inviting somebody to talk about the moon, by the way. Maybe I do, but that's not what I'm doing right now. I am inviting people that are more, talking about things that I think build better societies and also better workplaces.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, honestly, one of those podcasts where the questions just went out the window and it was a beautiful chat. We're very open and transparent. So I'm like, you know what?
I told you before.
I told you before. Enrique, this was brilliant. I mean, in a way, let's be honest. There's no way we can actually, and I feel that even for our audience, there's no way that we can really discuss about HR communities like this is just 1 hour. As mentioned by Enrique, there's gaps that continue to create. So there's going to continue to have discussion. And I could probably have these exact same podcasts in 2 years with you, and we'll probably have different perspective as well to the same questions as we have. But regardless, I hope that for our audience, what they have learned today will at least give them that curiosity to look more into these communities, to have those red flags about the areas maybe to avoid. In other words, looking at the credential behind it, the credibility, of course, the sources, thinking outside the box. Absolutely love that. But most importantly, Enrique, we're looking forward to your podcast. We'll be sure to link it. We'll be sure to link it as well in the description once it is out. But for our audience, feel free to reach out to Enrique if you have any questions in regards to communities. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer. And most importantly, thank you both, Lukas and Enrique, for joining me on this podcast. And thank you for our audience for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.